Storm Day by Joseph Michael Cerra. Jacob. Low in the early morning sky, hanging over the church distant at the top of the hill, 3 stars aligned perfected, ascending left to right, as if the heavens were playing tic-tac-toe, or so Jacob mused. These were the boy's favorite objects in the winter sky, his companions on this weekly walk to St. Dominic's Church, where Jake served every Tuesday as the altar boy for the 6 o'clock Mass. For all the wonder these stars evoked, Jake never thought about them except during these morning journeys, when they were set out in front of him, majestic, each one finding significance in the presence of the other 2. Higher and to the right, 7 stars grouped with greater radiance. These stars fascinated Jake but didn't summon the same admiration. To Jake, these were competitors, each yearning to be more splendid than the others. They lacked the fidelity of his triplets, which aligned so that each one unselfishly glorified the others. Jake trudged uphill through an open field covered by a pristine snowpack higher than his knees. The boy took deliberate but rapid steps, trying to scale the hillside as fast as he could. An overnight winter storm, a nor'easter fiercer than predicted, had blown through the area. Wicked wind blasts had caused snowdrifts several feet high in places. When he started dressing that morning, bundling in his thermal underwear, down jacket, thermal socks, and boots, Jake had no idea how much snow had fallen overnight. Only when he opened his back door did the boy realize that the walk to St. Dominic's would require more time and effort than he had anticipated. Still, Jake never considered abandoning his obligation to serve Mass. The kids at school had a nickname for the 6 o'clock Mass, the Penguins' Mass. The 6 o'clock Mass was the one attended by all the nuns who taught at St. Dominic's, the boys' grammar school. Rumors prevailed that the Penguins doled out frightful punishments to altar boys who skipped out on serving Mass. Jake wasn't willing to test whether excessive snowfall served as a valid excuse. As the morning neared 6, the ferocity of the overnight storm was forgotten but for the deep snow carpeting the earth. The morning sky was peaceful, clear, adorned by a few slight strands of fluffy clouds, white bows attached to dark blue wrapping paper. The air was crisp and clean, every breeze was virginal. There was something foreign, different and yet exciting about being alone on this snow-covered hillside under this early morning sky. All was passive, except for Jake. To keep himself moving, the boy pretended that the hill he was scaling presented a staircase that might take him to the stars above. In the next moment, Jake was an astronaut, Neil Armstrong, under the dark dome of a distant planet, Mars, trudging through cold Martian soil that no man had ever touched before. The boy's bulky winter coat was his spacesuit. His hood and ski mask were his helmet. Stopping for a moment, Jake looked behind him and viewed the trail marked by his bootsteps. He turned around again and in front of him saw new terrain waiting to be conquered. Jake took an exaggerated forward step, repeating the words he'd heard Armstrong pronounce a few months earlier. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." He chuckled. "That's a Roger, Houston." The boy embraced the cold, savoring the way his nostrils shivered when he inhaled, relishing the lively sensation of the frosty oxygen as it tingled his young lungs. Jake was awake and alive. He loved winter mornings. Jake released his warm breath from his mouth, watching his foggy steam trail away like cigarette smoke. He did this several times, pretending he had a butt hanging out of the side of his mouth. The boy puffed his cheeks so that they were as beefy as those of Father Paulus, the old portly pastor at the church, who had yellowed teeth, short gray hair along the sides of his head, and a cigarette dangling out of the side of his mouth at all times, except when saying Mass. Jake pushed another stream of warm air out of his mouth. As he did so, he mimicked what Father Paulus often said to the altar boys while taking a final, long drag on his cigarette right before starting the entry procession for the Sunday Mass at noon. "Let's work fast today, boys. The Eagles game starts at 1. While training to be an altar boy, Jake learned that Sunday Mass would last at least an hour. No one ever told this to Father Paulus. The priest finished in 45 minutes or less, every Sunday. Among the parishioners at St. Dominic's, Father Paulus's reputation for getting them home in time for Sunday kickoff was controversial. Some joke that Father Paulus may not deliver your soul to the Lord, but he can deliver your soul to the eagles. Other parishioners found it no laughing matter. They cited a litany of complaints against the middle-aged priest, including that he rushed through Mass like it was a burden. He gave boring homilies that seemed unprepared, and he had a bad example for the school kids of St. Dominic's, the way he constantly smoked. Father Paulus drank too much at parish social events, or so Jake heard. The priest could be heard slurring his words while blowing cigarette smoke into the faces of his parishioners, oblivious either to what he was doing or to how rude this was. Some parishioners dreaded being assigned the seats next to Father Paulus, or purgatory on earth, as they called it. Jake thought the priest looked like he was 80 years old and was surprised when he heard his mother tell a friend that he was 55. Jake knew a lot about Father Paulus from the things he'd said as they prepared for Mass. He'd grown up in a town nearby in northeast Pennsylvania, the son of a coal miner. He'd played high school football, a lineman back in the day when the same 11 played offense and defense. The priest never bragged that he'd been a good player, but he must have been, because he went on to play football at Fordham in the 1930s, teammates with Vince Lombardi on nationally ranked teams. Father Paulus could speak English and Latin and 3 other languages. Parishioners joked that he could slur in 5 tongues. Father Paulus told Jake that he'd been a college student when he first received his calling, never explaining any more than that. This confused Jake. The boy didn't understand why a college football player would become a priest. Older people in town knew Father Paulus from when he'd been young. They said that he had no genuine calling toward the clergy, insisting that the priest had succumbed to the pressure of a domineering mother. When Jake asked Father Paulus why he became a priest, the inquiries went unanswered. The priest instead filled the boy's ears about college games before sold-out crowds at the polo grounds, or his analysis about the fortunes of his Eagles this season. Just last week, Father Paulus told the altar boys, "I'm going to wear black Cossacks the rest of the winter if the Eagles end the season with 4 straight losses. We've got to beat the Niners." The snowpack challenged Jake, a voice of its own, telling him to go home. He'd never make it. There was no point to it at all. Jake had no answer except that serving Mass felt like carrying a message to someone who might need it. Yet he felt exhausted and could not go on. Winded, Jake dropped down, nestling into the snow on his back. He decided to rest for a few minutes and go back home. Jake stared upward toward the triplets and measured his labored breathing, inhale and exhale, each gasp becoming more relaxed. Jake tried to focus on his 3 stars individually, as if placed on separate panels of a triptych. But he found this impossible to do. They drew their allure from the presence of the others. He could not think of any one of them alone, isolated. Jake took a handful of snow and smashed it on his face. The cold empowered him. Energized, the boy became a college footballer doing early morning calisthenics. He heard Coach Parsagian's whistle and performed jumping jacks while lying on the hill. A snow angel formed on the frosty earth where he lay. Andrew. Father Paulus drew long on his cigarette and blew the smoke out through the open window of the sacristy. His burst was no match for a wall of icy air which blew his fumes right back at him. The priest coughed, unable to stop his bark from graduating into a boundless hack. A waft, a lovely familiar voice echoed, "You sound sick, Andrew. Let's see the doctor." A mother who has lost a child is so protective of the one who remains. Outside the sacristy window, a white carpet of snow rolled down the hillside toward the valley where the townsfolk lived. Father Paulus imagined that the church was the kingdom of God, sitting on a cumulus cloud looking down on creation. He puffed again while chuckling at the naivete of his imagery. His mother would be proud. As he stood at the sacristy window, smoking, the priest recited the rosary in a low voice, inaudible, interrupted only by his inhaling or exhaling of smoke. He lost track of which decade he was on. He couldn't hold a cigarette and rosary beads at the same time. Father Paulus prayed for his mother and father who had now left this world, for his parishioners, and for the wisdom to learn how to make them like him, even though he debated if praying to be liked was an appropriate request. He prayed for Anna Coyne, his beautiful red-headed girlfriend, whom he had loved so dearly and who had broken his heart. He took her rejection hard, and as a sign that his mother's will should be done. Had that been a rash decision? Should he have tried to love again? The priest prayed for Anna's happiness, even though in fleeting seconds of candor he admitted that he wouldn't mind if she'd grown old and miserable without him. For whatever was God's will, which always seemed like a catch-all to him. It was easier for Father Paulus to pray, "Thy will be done." Focusing on specific prayers saddened him, as all the burdens of his parishioners were his to share, and there were just so many burdens. Parishioners counted on the priest to be present at the occasion of every loss and speak meaningful words. Most often, Father Paulus fumbled for what to say. Often parishioners asked him, "Why?" as if he served as God's spokesman and had the answers straight from the Lord himself. And the priest had no idea why. Any response he gave would be a guess, and not a good one at that. Just last month, a young couple in the parish had buried their young son, stricken with leukemia. He gave the last rites and offered the funeral mass. The priest labored at his homily and now couldn't even remember what he said. When studying at the seminary, Father Paulus never conceived that the obligations he would be undertaking would include burying a child and then explaining that loss to the parents. All the losses and burdens diminished him, but this funeral had broken his spirit. It had been too hard. "Thy will be done." But why? Why, if you love us so much, why that boy? Why those parents? The priest was mumbling his prayers, interrogating the heavens, troubled, when he noticed Jake trudging through the snow, undaunted, on this Tuesday morning storm day. Father Paulus's mood lightened at the sight of Jake marching forward without a burden in the world. He envied Jake, such a happy, frivolous boy. But what would become of Jake? How long before the world broke his heart and destroyed his spirit? The priest smiled when he saw Jake lay down in the snow. He laughed when the boy started making snow angels. He understood Jake so well, what was inside his head, for he was so much like Jake once. Father Paulus remembered being young, frolicking in high piles of snow, accepting the privilege of life, even if it meant being sometimes cold, sometimes challenged, sometimes unhappy. How could anyone know when they were warm, strong, or happy if they had not been cold, challenged, or unhappy at some point? For that moment, the sacristy window became a looking-glass into the past. The old priest spied on his youthful self. When was it, precisely, when the priest first started to hate snowfalls? Seeing Jake's head angle toward the sky, Father Paulus glanced upward, observing the same constellations, and he was struck with another memory. The priest's mind traveled to his days in the seminary, when he trusted that no one possessed the right to darken counsel, obscurare consilium, while laboring in the incompleteness of this world. He wondered why he had accepted it so easily before his trust had been tested. Father Paulus couldn't remember where he was in the rosary. His mind blanked, save for the animate boy playing in the snow and the lifeless boy now in the dirt. The priest stared at the constellations and reflected on the boys' respective fates. The priest once had believed with searing conviction that there were just two options. The first being that the lifeless boy met the fate of a random, pointless, and sometimes cruel human existence. He resisted this with every spark of his intellect, although he confessed that he lived his day-to-day life on these terms. Why couldn't his spirit just resign itself to the way of corporal existence? Can human existence have any meaning if all human virtues, the capacity to love, to care, to create, are illusions of a significance that did not exist? He spoke this out loud, so he reasoned that he must have been talking to God, demanding a response from a being he was accusing of having no existence. What are the privileges, then, of being the most sentient of the earth's creatures, to be duped into believing human life possesses significance beyond the temporal? To the priest, to accept all this would make humans perhaps the saddest of all creatures, as they alone possessed the capacity to grasp the ultimate pointlessness of their own existence, or perhaps even pathetic, because humans intuited great meaning and significance to things which had none. Wouldn't it be preferable to be an animal incapable of any higher thought? If these were the terms of human existence, then why not choose selfishness? Why not abuse the trust of those naive enough to be guided by that higher but fantastical intuition? Why not lie and kill in pursuit of power? The priest grew angry at the silence. He yelled, "Answer me!" His voice echoed. The priest grew pained at the thoughts of the dead boy and the soul-crushing silence. "Answer me!" he sobbed. Father Paulus grabbed another cigarette from his pack, stroked the match, and inhaled deeply as he lit the end. He extinguished the match with a shake of disgust, and at that moment he glanced outside at the animate boy frolicking in the snow. The boy had stood again and was continuing his march toward the church, head on high, eyes fixed on the constellations. A ferocious wind blew across the hillside. The boy shook his head but remained locked on the stars. The priest craned his neck forward into the cold and focused anew on the constellations. Out of nowhere, a verse from Scripture played in his mind. He knew the verse well, but had never perceived its relevancy, yet it struck him completely different this morning. Father Paulus laid down his cigarette and took in mouthfuls of chilled air, trying to rid the taste of smoke. He touched the 3 beads at the bottom of the rosary, but gazed at the 3 stars aligned in the sky, as if they were the beads themselves. The priest started praying, the words resonating as they did many years ago. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The voice from the storm. It was already close to 6 o'clock by the time Jake arrived at the church. Jake didn't fear any scolding from Father Paulus, who himself sometimes strolled into the sacristy just minutes before Mass. What he feared was that one of the penguins might see him ducking into the back of the building so late. Such a transgression, minor as it seemed, earned the offender 1 hour detention after school. Jake approached the building on watch for any nun on the prowl, ready to duck into the snow and hide if the need arose. As he drew closer, though, Jake noticed one trail in the snow passing through the parish parking lot, and it was running from the rectory to the church's sacristy door. He saw no trails leaving the convent building at all. A massive snowdrift, about as tall as the boy himself and several feet wide, had levied itself unrepentantly against the convent doorway. The nuns were trapped inside the convent, unable to get out for Mass. "They aren't really penguins," floated devilishly through the boy's mind. Now Jake bounded toward the church door without further delay. There was not a soul in the nave of the building. He'd never seen the church empty before. The boy raced toward the sacristy, finding the priest already dressed in cassocks. "Jacob, I didn't expect to see you this morning," Father Paulus said. "I'm sorry I'm late." "Don't be silly. You deserve a medal. I'll tell the nuns, but just go home. There's no one here. I'll handle the Mass. Go back to bed." "What about the candles?" The priest's lips curled. "If you could trudge all the way here through the snow, what excuse do I have for faltering in my faith and duties?" "Huh?" The priest chuckled. "Listen to me, I speak in parable. That means I lit them myself." "But don't you want someone here?" "No, I'm going to do a quick service. I've got it covered." Jake nodded his head and started to leave, but then an idea popped into his head. How fast can Father Paulus say a Mass if no one's there? The boy thought that what was about to happen would make a funny story for the schoolyard. Father Paulus said a Mass with nobody present, and he did it in 5 minutes. Father Paulus raced through the daily Mass in less than 20 minutes, even when people were watching. How fast would it be if no one was there? Jake just had to see this. Jake turned and walked toward the back of the church. Rather than leave, though, the boy ducked into the last pew, crawling low toward the aisle, parking himself beneath the top of the row in front. Looking upward, Jake focused on the knotty pine-planked ceiling, reigning 60 feet over the pews, each plank lacquered and polished. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling in rows over both sides of the church. These chandeliers burned bright on Sundays. On a Tuesday morning, they were dim and appeared like twinkling stars against the ceiling, which took the appearance of a night sky in the darkened church. When he was younger, Jake had stared at the chandeliers and ceiling planks as Father Paulus prattled during Sunday Mass. Young Jake often had wondered whether he could throw a rubber ball high enough that it would hit the ceiling. He dreamed of trying when the church emptied. Sometimes Jake stared so long at the ceiling planks that they would blur, or he gazed without interruption at a single bulb on a single chandelier until it started to burn so that he could see nothing else. The clang of the chime opening Mass summoned Jake's attention. Father Paulus himself had struck the chime. That was the altar boy's job. Jake watched as the priest paced toward the front of the altar and genuflected toward the tabernacle, a position which he held for a prolonged period. When Father Paulus genuflected, his knee never touched the ground, and he jumped back like a sprung jack-in-the-box. Today, the priest held his position so long that the boy now felt ashamed to be spying. The priest said every opening prayer with slow deliberation, answering with the responsive prayers of the absent congregation, leaving extended periods of silence in between. He said some of the prayers in Latin. Father Paulus did the reading slowly, pausing at the end of each reading. Jake looked at the church's clock behind him. It was already 6:20 a.m. Father Paulus's daily mass should have been over by now. Jake couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the priest proceed to the pulpit as if it were a Sunday to deliver a homily. Father Paulus never gives a weekday homily. So those, wise in the ways of this world, tell me that I am a weak, foolish man. I believe in some fairy tale character, and I do so because either I'm too stupid to know better or too weak to accept this world on its terms. I'm not stupid, but I'm weak. But I'm weak because I drink too often from the cup that this world offers me. The world offers imperfect justice and instructs me to accept that. Yet listen to what you say, because imperfect justice is a contradiction in terms, a synonym for injustice. Imperfect justice is a euphemism for those who are willing to accept injustice. But I feel justice must exist. Perfect justice, which is redundant, because there's either justice or there isn't. And perfect mercy, either there's mercy or there isn't. So what about a child born into deprivation, knowing nothing but hunger, who dies of starvation? Forgotten through the grace of imperfect justice. A shame, yet life goes on. I just cannot accept that. No, I believe this child's lifelong cries forever reverberate in the ears of a loving and merciful God, reverberate for justice, ring for mercy, and we, indifferent to his cries when he lived, likewise must now hear those cries and seek mercy. What proof do I have? I have my intuition. You say that you are people of reason and intuition isn't good enough, but is that reasonable? Every scientific fact ever discovered has been deduced through intuition. Doesn't the scientific method first require intuition, an idea that is then tested and evaluated? Is it rational to reject an intuition shared by some, mainly because we have no way to test it? Father Paulus paused. Jake lifted his head too much. Did their eyes meet? The priest coughed and cast his eyes downward. His fingers rubbed the sides of the pulpit. The homily was over. Jake was sure of it. He squirmed to hide anew, but Father Paulus suddenly looked up, and their eyes locked. This storm reminds me of the storms we carry inside. The questions, the burdens, the doubts. And yet, there it is, the voice of God, a messenger persevering through the storm against all odds. Father Paulus stared toward the ceiling of the church building. It appeared like the priest was gazing through the ceiling and right into the heavens. I trust in the Lord, because he alone loosened the belt of Orion and bound the Pleiades, and not one of us can do that. The end.